Welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to be investigating an unseen threat today. Hidden away in dark corners, in rural barns, or maybe even right inside your own garage, there is a pathogen that can strike entirely without warning. It's an incredibly rare virus, one that quietly bides its time, completely undetected, right up until it turns deadly within a matter of days. We're going to map out exactly how this virus operates, how it has suddenly started breaking its own rules, and the absolutely crucial steps you need to take to defend against it. Let's get started.
Right at this very moment, a deeply concerning scenario is unfolding. A cruise ship is currently stranded off the coast of West Africa, near Cape Verde. The passengers are trapped. They're confined to this floating vessel, while a suspected outbreak of an exceptionally rare virus has already claimed 3 lives, leaving several others severely ill. As you can imagine, health officials are just scrambling to manage the cases on board.
But this isolated maritime emergency really forces us to stop and ask a deeply unsettling question. What happens when a rare virus breaks its own rules? You see, this is a disease that's traditionally confined to very specific land-based rural environments. So the fact that it has suddenly appeared in the middle of the ocean, literally thousands of miles away from its usual habitat, well, it suggests a highly unusual shift in how this threat behaves.
Let's define exactly what we're looking at here. We are talking about Hantavirus. This is a class of virus that was first identified over near the Hantavirus River in Korea. Its primary hosts, mice and other rodents. Humans usually contract the disease not from each other, but when they come into direct contact with infected rodents. Or, even more commonly, just by breathing in aerosolized particles from their saliva, urine, and droppings. It's a stealthy virus, and it is potentially deadly, especially if it decides to target the kidneys, the heart, or the lungs.
Now, what makes this virus so incredibly deceptive is how it actually takes hold. Look at the early stage. It basically disguises itself as a severe flu. We're talking fatigue, fever, and these deep aching pains in large muscle groups like your thighs, hips, and back. About half of patients also get dizzy, they get the chills, or they suffer from severe nausea. But then comes the late stage, usually 4 to 10 days later, and that's where the true horror begins. The patient develops severe coughing and profound shortness of breath, as their lungs literally begin to fill with fluid.
And making this pathogen even harder to track is its incubation period. If you're exposed to the virus, you aren't going to know immediately. The time between infection and the moment you actually start feeling those initial symptoms is typically 2 to 3 weeks. But in some cases, it can take up to 8 full weeks for the illness to even surface. By the time a patient actually ends up in the emergency room, the initial exposure event is usually just a distant memory.
And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why the current situation off the coast of Africa is causing such massive alarm among health experts. Normal hantavirus transmission is strictly animal to human, but this cruise ship anomaly suggests something much more dangerous. The World Health Organization suspects that a highly rare variant known as the Andes virus is responsible for the Cape Verde outbreak. Why does that matter? Because the Andes variant is literally the only one known to occasionally spread directly from person to person.
When a virus that's capable of human-to-human transmission enters a tightly closed environment, like a cruise ship, the results are devastating. The current toll stands at 7 individuals severely ill and 3 dead. These are stark numbers, and they highlight just how lethal this pathogen is once it takes root in a localized population. It carries an extraordinarily high mortality rate for those who progress into severe respiratory distress.
Let's open up a cold case. The 1993 Four Corners outbreak.
To truly understand the threat today, we have to look backwards. Let's go to early May 1993, in the Four Corners region. That's where Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, and Utah all meet. A young woman died suddenly of a completely mysterious respiratory failure. Just days later, her physically fit Navajo fiancé was rushed to a New Mexico hospital, suffering from severe shortness of breath. He died shortly after. Within hours, medical investigators combing the region uncovered 5 more deaths. All of them were young, all of them were entirely healthy, and all of them succumbed to acute respiratory failure.
State health officials, the Indian Health Service, the Navajo Nation, and the CDC's Special Pathogens Branch had to immediately mobilize. They had to narrow down the suspects before more people died. Initial theories about herbicide exposure? Eliminated. A new, lethal strain of influenza? Ruled out. Instead, they started sending patient tissue samples for exhaustive analysis, using what were then brand new molecular methods to hunt for viral genes. They were essentially looking for a ghost.
Through some truly relentless medical detective work, they eventually linked the pulmonary syndrome to a previously unknown type of hantavirus. But here's the thing. A virus needs a host. It needs a vehicle to travel into human environments. And as investigators would soon discover, the real culprit was hiding right in plain sight, living right alongside the victims.
From June to August of that year, researchers began trapping rodents inside homes, out in pine groves, and in summer sheep camps, and they finally identified it. The deer mouse was the primary host for this new strain. This is a very common rodent that just thrives in rural barns, woodpiles, and outbuildings. And the test results they got back were staggering. Roughly 30% of the deer mice they tested were actively infected with the virus.
But why 1993? Why did it strike right then? Well, the investigation revealed a critical climate trigger. The Four Corners area had suffered through years of intense drought, which was then suddenly broken by a period of really heavy rain. This weather pattern caused an absolute explosion in the rodent population. The sheer number of mice forced them out of the wild and into much closer contact with humans, perfectly setting the stage for this deadly cluster of infections.
Moving on to defense, prevention, and reality. Surviving this pathogen requires actionable intelligence. First, we have to acknowledge the grim clinical reality here. There is absolutely no specific cure for a hantavirus infection. Now, while an antiviral drug called ribavirin has shown some effectiveness for the specific strain that causes kidney failure, it just hasn't proven effective when the virus attacks the lungs and heart. Survival relies entirely on early intervention. If recognized early enough, patients can be given critical oxygen therapy to help them endure that period of severe respiratory distress. Time is really your only weapon.
And honestly, this is perhaps the most sobering fact of this entire explainer. Many people who become severely ill with hantavirus report that they never even saw a single rodent. They never noticed any droppings. The danger is practically invisible. You simply cannot rely on obvious signs of an infestation to determine if you're at risk, especially if you live in areas where the virus is known to exist.
So your absolute best defense is taking total control of your environment. Rodent control has to be your primary strategy. Step 1, rigorously seal up all the holes and gaps in your home and your garage so they can't get in. Step 2, place traps strategically in and around your living spaces to actively reduce any hidden infestations. And Step 3, immediately clean up and secure any accessible food sources that might be drawing them in. You've got to minimize contact before the contact ever occurs.
Now, if you suspect you've been exposed, the actions you take in the following hours could quite literally dictate your survival. You need to seek immediate medical care if you develop a fever, deep muscle aches, and sudden breathlessness. But more importantly, you must explicitly tell your doctor if you have been around rodents or outbuildings. Doctors aren't automatically looking for rare diseases, so telling them about the exposure alerts them to test for hantavirus. And finally, if human-to-human strains like the Andes virus are a concern, standard precautions like N95 masks and social distancing are absolutely critical.
Now let's keep things in perspective. The broader public risk of contracting hantavirus remains exceptionally low. It's not an everyday threat for the vast majority of us. But, as we've seen from the Navajo Nation in 1993, all the way to the stranded cruise ship off the coast of Africa today, it is a rare risk with a deadly, completely unforgiving consequence if it's ignored.
We've mapped its origins, we've tracked its progression, and we've outlined the defense. But as variants like the Andes virus threaten to change exactly how this pathogen spreads, leaving passengers stranded and authorities scrambling, it leaves us with one final, lingering thought. Are we truly prepared for the unseen threats quietly waiting in the dark corners of our world?